Hegel, he starts with this thesis of non-being. And we'll posit this with everything, or all being. You could say nothing. Okay, I'm not going to write this down. I'm going to say it slowly for you, though. By definition, nothing is that of which nothing can be added to or taken away from. Because if I could add something to nothing, it wouldn't be nothing anymore. And if I could take something away from nothing, it wouldn't have been nothing to begin with. Okay, got it?
Right.
Now wait for it. Everything is that of which nothing can be added to or taken away from. Because if you add something to everything, it wasn't everything. And if you take something away from everything, it's not everything anymore. So by definition, everything and nothing have the same definition. That of which nothing can be added to or taken away from. And what is the synthesis between everything and nothing? What's in between everything and nothing?
All things.
No, that's everything.
Something.
Something. Because something ain't nothing, but it sure isn't everything.
Yeah.
So it's in between these movements. And Hegel would say the truth is the whole. Nothing, everything, and something. And this is how he sees the Spirit of God moving from absolute non-being, or you could even say pure being, it doesn't matter, into everything we know and see and experience in the world. But it starts with God's Spirit coming into this space-time continuum and then unfolding through human events. And so he begins with this idea of like desire. And out of this nothingness, this void, this vastness, we have the inklings of desire beginning, almost like tendrils or roots coming out of the abyss, out of the chaos. And this comes into the earliest civilizations, which he would see as like savage, barbaric. He would liken this to like tribal religions or political systems, or even like the despotic views in the East, where you would have maybe like god kings or these sorts of things. And he believes out of this process, Geist manifests itself into the world, or the Spirit of God, if you prefer, is manifesting itself into the world until it gets to the Greek materialist. But the problem with the Greeks, as we already noticed, was they were so good at looking at and evaluating this physical material world that they confused the physical material world with God himself. But when the fullness of time had come, Christ enters into the scene, and now we have this Spirit, or Geist, manifesting itself in the person of Jesus the Christ. And for the first time in cosmic history, God can know himself. And you might say, wait a second, this is the omniscient being? This is the first time he can know himself? I'm speaking in human linear terms here, not in eternity. But in this space-time continuum, it took the incarnation for God to be able to look back from history to know himself, and know himself in the incarnation. And then from that point on, any human that so had the Spirit of Christ in them could participate in this movement of Geist through human history. Yeah, we had things like inquisitions and people burned at the stakes, little thorns along the way, but this finally ends with German Romanticism. And I don't mean romanticism like a Harlequin romance novel. I mean people who have looked at the world and they say it is not enough. There's something beyond the physical, material reality. There's also a spiritual dimension. And that's what this German transcendental idealism was into. Yes, there's a real concrete physical world like Kant is positing, but we are bringing something to it. But it's not just us. The very Spirit of God is shaping and forming history. And so Hegel is saying it takes this transcendental philosophy to actually understand for the first time, because the problem with Christianity, it's all dealing in metaphors. For example, and I know this is going to sound a little blasphemous to you all. I don't mean it that way. I don't think Hegel meant that way. He saw himself as a devout Lutheran. But this idea of God as our Father, is that literal, physical, material? Or is that a metaphor? Is that a figure of speech to explain our relationship? I mean, and I don't want to be crude, but God did not seed us in a physical material sense. Although if you look at 1 John 3:9, it sure does imply that our new life comes from the very seed of God. But we'll talk about that later. We're not there yet. So this idea that Christianity is great and wonderful and it tells us the truth of God, but it's so wrapped in metaphor, symbolism, analogy, that we need philosophy to show us actually what's happening. And we get beyond the physicalism, we get beyond the pictures, and we're coming out of the cave, basically, walking in the full light of day. So basically, like John Scotus before him, Hegel is basically saying it is philosophy that opens the heavens, right? Not religion, not the Greek materialism, the sciences, but philosophy itself. And then with this, we come to the full budding of Western thought. Make some petals here. This full bloom of Western thought. But what happens after the bloom? Anyways, in this bloom, humanity is self-realized, and we realized who we are in God and that we are part of God's movement. But this is the cosmic loop piece, because once we have this God realization or consciousness, or that we have been knit together with the Godhead, it loops back into itself, because now we are one with the Spirit, one with the Geist. And so we become part of this process, or this cosmic loop of God moving through history. Yeah, that's my little cosmic loop dance, right? Where it's just this incessant flow in like that torus shape of everything moving and flowing, etc. Any questions on this? So, God being the Alpha and the Omega and everything in between, but it's not a linear line. It's like a cosmic, self-perpetuating loop with no beginning and no end, world without end. What happens after the bloom normally in a plant? What does the bloom turn into? Okay, pollination, then what happens to the flower?
Yeah, decays.
Not yet. Something else happens. I know I'm not living in an agrarian culture here.
You think it's fertile?
Yeah.
Yes, and the flower produces fruit, which is, what's the fruit of the flower? Seeds. Seeds, okay, you get rose hips, right? The roses turn into rose hips, and if you open up the rose hips, it contains the seeds. And personally, I think this is what happened. Rather than us coming to total self-consciousness or God awareness or what, however you want to phrase it, after this German Enlightenment period, I feel like it went back to seed. And so we have this great blooming and flowering, but contained within this become the seeds of the future. And I'm going to highlight two of these seeds for the remainder of this journey, because I think they're still the two dominant philosophies. They definitely were of the 20th century, and moving into the 21st century, we can still kind of see them acting out. And the first of these seeds I want to start with comes from Karl Marx.